we're going to now begin talking about the period known as the High Renaissance, and all of our discussion will once again center on Italy for the most part. About 1492, the political influence of the Medici all but ended when Lorenzo died. And so there was a decline in artistic patronage in Florence. Almost simultaneously, there was interest in art in the north of Italy that was led by the Catholic Church. The Pope became very interested in art and in paying artists to do work for the church. So, as you could probably expect, many artists went where the money was. And so we sort of mark the beginning of the High Renaissance about the date 1503, when Pope Julius ascended to the papacy. Julius was a military leader as well as the highest leader in the church, but he loved the fine arts, and he summoned two very, very important artists to Rome. Raphael Sanzio, who is referred to as Raphael, and Michelangelo Buonarroti, who is also just referred to as Michelangelo, whom I'm sure most of you have heard of before. Let's begin with a brief discussion of Raphael, though, because he's got some pretty important pieces that are very characteristic of the High Renaissance. He was born in a town in Italy called Urbino, and Urbino was a major center of humanist learning. So he would have grown up being taught and being around the ideas of Renaissance humanism, of human potential, of balance and order, and human mastery over chaos, and all of those very important humanist ideals. He moved to Florence in 1505, and he worked there for about 3 years before the Pope brought him to Rome. And while he was in Florence, he painted a great number of what have become called the Madonna Paintings. And here he developed a style that would become his trademark. So this is one of his Madonna paintings, and this happens to be called the Madonna of the Meadow. And let's look a little bit about what's going on here and how this is very, very Renaissance in its composition and in its ideas. First of all, you have a very biblical subject, Mary and Jesus. And again, in this painting, you can see the geometric, mathematical precision in Raphael's work. You have the triangular composition that was so characteristic of the Renaissance, with either Mary, in this case, at the top. Sometimes, of course, Jesus is at the top. It's very balanced. You've got that nature in the background, the figures in the foreground. And so you also have in this painting this infusion of human qualities in the divine subject, something that these Renaissance painters were very interested in. They were constantly trying to figure out how to bring together their religious beliefs along with this new idea of humanism. And so one of the ways they do that is to infuse divine figures in their works with very human, qualities. And all of these are very much Renaissance ideals. So right after this painting, Raphael was summoned to Rome by Pope Julius. Julius loved Raphael and commissioned him for many projects in the Vatican. He thought he was a fabulous painter, a very talented man. Raphael also held some administrative posts. For example, he was superintendent of the Vatican's antiquities, and he was the first architect of St. Peter's. So he was a very, very talented person. One of his jobs at the Vatican was to paint on the wall of the Stanza della Signatura. And this was just the office in the Vatican where the Pope signed all important documents. And these documents were prepared in this office, and then the Pope came there to sign them. So sort of, it was a scriptorium, I guess, for lack of a better word. And so Raphael did, and this is the painting that's on the wall in that office. And it's called the School of Athens. And it is very, very characteristics of the classical ideals of the Renaissance. I want to tell you a little bit about what's going on here. First of all, it's a homage, it's paying tribute to the classical Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle. And as you guys know from Humanities 101, Plato and Aristotle were two of the most important classical Greek philosophers. So what you have here is Plato and Aristotle in the very center of the painting. And if you look closely, Plato is pointing up and Aristotle is pointing down. Now this is so smart on Raphael's part, because in these very simple gestures, each of these philosophers is showing where they believe truth lies. For Plato, it lies in a world above us, or a world other than us, the realm of the ideal truth, ideal beauty. That the things on this earth are just a shadow of those ideals. And if you remember back to the allegory of the cave, that truth actually is shown to be something different than what the people in the cave thought. They just saw it as a shadow of something, and they believed it was true. But it was only when the person got out of the cave did he realize, oh, no, truth is somewhere different than on this earth. And Aristotle, pointing down, shows the conflict in the philosophies of these two men. Aristotle believed truth could be found in the things around us, that it was through observation of many different types of things that we came to know what was true. So Raphael is very savvy in doing that and communicating that with just those gestures. And so we also see other Renaissance elements at work here. Not only is it this reflecting back to the classical past, but we see some other things. The architectural framework, very classically Roman, very Renaissance. The subject matter, think about this. You've got Greek philosophy in the Vatican. Again, religion and humanism colliding. An artist trying to work out that contradiction, or that seeming contradiction, in a seamless way. Interestingly, even the Pope believed in the idea of philosophy and encouraged philosophy, because he believed philosophy and the ability to think like that was a gift from God. And so you have other important classical figures. You have Pythagoras calculating on a tablet. And then you actually have Michelangelo in the painting. This is believed to be him here. Raphael is in the painting. And so he mixes the classical with the Renaissance in this painting. You can also see the balance and ordered space divided in half. And again, just a very classical tribute to humanism in a very religious space, and them trying to sort out that balance. This is Raphael's last work, and it's a little bit different, in my mind, to what we've seen before. It was left unfinished. Now, there's a lot more movement and a lot more emotion in this painting than in the others. It's pushing those limits of the calm, ordered, balanced face of the Renaissance. But you can see here it's still mathematically precise. You've got the triangle position here with Jesus at the top ascending to heaven. You've got definitely three levels, three layers of space here. The light up here, God, and it gets darker as you go to, the world down here. As Jesus is leaving and going up. And this is really considered a great moment in the High Renaissance as the emotion begins to be funneled into this particular painting. Now, I want to talk briefly about Michelangelo, and then after this, you're going to have some things to watch and some other things to do to play around with learning more about Michelangelo. But I want to give a brief overview of him. In Florence, he began his career in the sculpture gardens of Lorenzo Medici. There we have a Medici again. And he went to these gardens and learned to sculpt, copied them. He Lorenzo saw one of his early pieces and was blown away by what a good job he did. And that was sort of how Michelangelo's career took off. Probably his best known early piece is David, and his David has become almost synonymous with Florence. So let's look at that. And you may have seen this before. It's 18 feet tall, and the story goes that he carved this from a block of marble that another artist started working on and then screwed up. So not only did he, sculpt this incredible 18-foot giant nude, but he did it with a piece of marble that someone else had messed up. Michelangelo used to say that he could actually see the figures in the untouched marble trying to get out, and he felt it was his job to just chisel away the pattern that he saw to bring them out. He was a prolific sculptor, and supposedly he could chisel more block in a day, even as an old man, than many sculptors could do all together at the same time. So he was very, very gifted. The David is a statement of idealized Platonic beauty, the perfect male form. How can we capture it? That was one of the emphasis of these Renaissance artists. How can we capture in art the perfect idealized male form? And it was placed outside the Palace Vecchio in Florence as a symbol of civic power. So it's set outside, right in front of the basically city hall type building. And anybody who came to the city hall had to pass it as they went in. And so it's supposed to be this symbol of might and power politically. Then in 1505, the Pope summoned Michelangelo to Rome to construct a tomb for him. The tomb was never finished because Michelangelo kept getting interrupted. And then Julius died, and the new Pope didn't care much about Julius's tomb. But part of it was finished, the Moses part, and you can find that picture in your book. But I want to talk mainly about the Sistine Chapel. He was commanded, Michelangelo, by Julius to fresco the ceiling in the Sistine Chapel. Now, he didn't want to do this. Michelangelo did not want to do this. And he actually left Rome and said, I'm not going to do it. Well, you didn't tell the Pope no. And so the Pope, through his ways of persuasion, brought Michelangelo back to Rome, and he commenced this project. This is an outline of the Sistine Chapel of what is on each of the panels, and this is a not very good picture of it. Your book, the picture in your book, is much, much better. So I encourage you to turn there as we talk about it. But there was great meaning in the panels of the Sistine Chapel, and if you just look for a few minutes, I want to explain to you a little bit of what's going on. At each of the four corners, you have stories of the Old Testament heroes. David against Goliath, Moses' rod becoming a snake, the story of Judith and Holofernes, which doesn't make it into the Christian canon, but it was a very important Old Testament story nonetheless. The 8 triangles are the ancestors of Christ mentioned in the Bible. The 10 side rectangles are pagan sibyls and prophets of the Old Testament. So some of these represent wisdom in the humanist sense, while some represent wisdom in the biblical sense. So again, that meshing of humanism and religion that we see over and over again. And the 9 center panels are stories from the book of Genesis. The creation of Adam, the creation of Eve, them getting kicked out of the garden, the flood, etc. Now, many people talk about some important meanings behind the panels in the Sistine Chapel. For one, art historians and critics see a great deal of Neoplatonism, movement of darkness to light, from borders to center, the liberation of the spirit from this world to the ideal realm, so to speak, the depiction of ideal forms. All of these are very Platonic ideals that are seen in the Sistine Chapel. You also have Christian views of the Old Testament at Christ's coming, so you've got that part in there as well. There's a great deal of tree symbolism, from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that's first mentioned in the book of Genesis to the tree of the cross that Christ was crucified on. And finally, the Pope's family was associated with a tree, an oak tree. Della Rovere was the last name of the Pope, which just meant of the oak tree. And then fourth, there is this connection that I mentioned before between human wisdom and God's revelation, the pagan sibyls and the prophets. So there's a great deal of meaning behind this particular painting. Now, one of the things that was interesting about the construction of the Sistine Chapel is that Michelangelo virtually did all of it by himself. And he had many people that worked for him, but because he was such a perfectionist, he virtually did the entire ceiling by himself. And he stood up to paint it. He stood on scaffolding and painted it. And he writes that he developed great neck problems, obviously, from looking up all the time during the construction. He got very frustrated with the Pope. The Pope began to hound him about when he was going to be finished. Finally, Michelangelo just resorted and began answering the Pope, "When I can." So it was a very stressful time of Michelangelo's life, and it was not, even though we look at it today as the great masterpiece that it is, Michelangelo ultimately considered himself a sculptor, and so he did not enjoy this process at all. Michelangelo was one of the artists in the Renaissance that made a fortune being an artist. He was a very wealthy man during his lifetime and a very interesting man. And I hope that as you continue in the next couple of links to learn more about Michelangelo, that you will really see the complexity of his character as well as just what an artistic genius that he was.